Hey, we are back. This is Ryan Naylor for another wonderful topic all around HR. All things HR, all the time. It's what we do. This is the People Podcast, the playbook to help you kind of optimize the people side of your business. I don't know if you guys are all hearing, but one of my favorite commercials out there is Marcus Lemonis, and he's on all the Sirius radio and whatnot, and he always talks about in order to drive a business, you got to have three things. You got to have the people, you got to have the process, and you got to have the product all dialed in. And I think it's really important in that order to make sure we have the right people. So joining me today, we've got Chloe Street, who's an expert at the human side of business. And I love her decades of experience in HR with some phenomenal companies, but I'm going to let her introduce herself. But Chloe, welcomes, and let's just kick things off with a question right out the gate, which is truly how do companies put the human back into human resources?
Great question. And that is at the core of the work that it is that I do today, having spent, as you mentioned, about 11 years in corporate HR at some of the most prestigious Fortune 500 companies like Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, and Meta, where I was solving for performance, but we weren't driving presence. We were told to build culture, but we were skipping the connection. We were told to manage teams, but we really didn't take the time to get to know them. And I share all of that because with the big titles, there comes bigger expectations. And often we are so focused on productivity and policy that we tend to miss the component of people, which is the fact that we aren't just our job titles. We are actually humans first. And we bring our full human self into work, whether we want to acknowledge that or not. Everyone is dealing with a life outside of the bubble and the environment that is called our workplace. And when we think about bringing the humanity in, it's really about creating the space, the platforms, the products, the opportunities for employees to feel seen in all that they are and not just for their responsibilities. So creating experiences where we get to know each other on that human level, and we shift our relationships from being really transactional. When you think about business, it's usually transactional. And instead making the relationships that we form within the workplace inspirational. And we do that by skipping some of the small talk and really getting into how we can support and serve each other, because at the end of the day, we are all there for a very united mission. But sometimes that idea tends to escape us.
I would say that's a phenomenal point to understand kind of what unites us. A lot of times it's the core values, the mission, the things on the side in the frames that the office place. But the reality is I would say more than not, people look at work as a job. It's a means to an end. It's a way to think of stuff bigger than ourselves, what we can support outside the walls of the workplace, right? It's the families, the friends, the lifestyle, the human interests outside of it. But tell me, you're spot on with that, is we have to look beyond the tasks that need to be accomplished and look at the human side of it. But tell me, why does this matter? What evidence do we have on why it matters to invest into this humanistic side of it right now?
Tons of research and tons of evidence. And what I'll say to the point of why it matters before I share some of the data with you is work isn't somewhere that we show up in the morning and then leave at night. It is a massive aspect of our life. And we're surrounded by our colleagues, our managers, our peers for such a long time of our life. And the quality of our life quite literally depends on the quality of our relationships in our life. And work colleagues are so critical and important in that, because when we're showing up into an environment where we feel a sense of belonging, or we feel as though we have a friend, we have a support system, we're far more motivated, we're far more productive, we have intrinsic grit and desire to contribute, and it becomes more fun. I've met some of my best friends at the previous companies that I've been at. And no matter what, it's this shared mentality that you're all in it together. So even amongst the really challenging, hard days, you know that you're all in the weeds and you're not isolated or alone in that. We're living in an isolation and loneliness epidemic right now, where 1 out of 4 individuals feel the weight of that isolation, which leads to burnout, stress, anxiety, a lot of mental health challenges. And now if we
You
get to
know,
the
that's so
business,
fascinating though,
yeah,
because we've never had a more connected
correct.
social construct in the history of time of our ability to connect so easily with technology, but yet loneliness is spiking at all-time highs. Do you have any insights on how that's impacting workplace culture, productivity?
Yes. Because of the access that we now have, and you're exactly right, there's never been more ways in which we can connect today, but we've never felt more disconnected than ever. I'm from New York City. You take a city like that where you are quite literally living on top of people, below people, and people still feel solo, isolated, alone. Because the channels in which we are connecting, it appears to be a relationship, but it's very surface level. We're craving depth. We're craving authenticity and realness. Just because we have these little devices, these little computers in our pockets, where we believe that we have 24 access to this individual or to this person, and that creates a urgency in the receiver to respond immediately if they receive a text message. Just because we have that access doesn't mean that person's available. It can be quite distracting. And within that, we're assuming that sending a text message is a form of connection. But guess what happens with that? There's a lot of misinterpretation with tone, with punctuality. Think about emails in the workplace. Someone might be rushing, so they send a short email to a colleague, and that colleague then takes it as they're upset with me, I did something wrong, and there's a whole ripple effect. So that's what I call thought traps. And there are 2 of them that we fall into that make us feel incredibly disconnected. And the first thought trap is assumptions, which, as we'll define it in this space, as history repeating itself. So, for example, if I have a colleague who showed up to a meeting last week unprepared, I now have an assumption that this week that colleague is going to show up unprepared. And already, I'm not in conversation with them, and I'm in conversation with the story I'm telling myself. Now,
Right.
second is interpretations. And with interpretations, that is something happens, and then we tell ourselves a narrative based on our own lived experience, our own perceptions, our circumstances, our set of beliefs. And so we interpret that situation through our own filter. So let me give you an example for that. I had a client yesterday who is on the C-suite team at a large organization. And his manager had shared in a Slack channel that there was a mistake with the presentation he submitted. Now, the stimulus is I received a Slack message on public blast, yes. However, the narrative, the interpretation that my client was making about that was that he's dumb, he's not capable, his manager doesn't trust him, doesn't believe in him. And now all of these stories start to build, and then we don't feel safe in the work environment. But yet it's an interpretation that we're making based on just a message that was sent in a Slack channel. So if we can peel back some of the storytelling that we're doing and try our best to live in the stimulus, which is just what is happening, then we begin to create more connection looking for understanding versus I'm going to come in with my own perception and you're going to come in with your own perception, and we're going to be living very different versions of that story.
How does the leader do that? I own a company, but it's hard for me to plant in the perfect interpretation amongst my employees, but I can also help control the story in which they're hearing. I can't control the interpretation, right? I can't control how they're going to interpret it. But maybe there's some tools that you recommend on ways leaders can be better at telling the right story or communicating on a regular cadence. What do you have for them to help make sure people don't take things out of context?
Yes, tons of different tools and resources. Now I'll share one or two off the bat. The first of which is actually asking your employees or your direct report or your team, now, how did you receive that? What is your interpretation of what I just shared? What's coming up for you? That way you can gauge where their head is at. Is that helpful?
Those are great questions. My only fear is a lot of managers are moving so quickly. It's not that they don't care, it's that they're on to the next topic so fast. It's hard to circle back and check in on people's emotions.
It definitely is. But what we're always looking at is short-term gain instead of long-term sustainable results. And really, connection isn't a big grand gesture often. It actually is the tiny habits that we install. So it could be as simple as, in 3 words, tell me how that landed for you. And that should take a minute or less. And this concept of time that we have, where we're always pushing to the next and we're speeding things up, actually creates an endless cycle of people feeling left behind. And it's interesting because I can share an example from my own life, right? Where I took I guess you could call it 14-day break from my business, which I had never done in my entire life because I was programmed to believe, keep moving forward, innovate, stay current. Things are changing all the time. And so quite literally in my career, I don't think I ever took more than 5 days off. And last year I went on a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which is no technology, no access to the outside world. And so you can imagine I was riddled with fear. And I never believed that I could take a break from all of this. And I signed the biggest deal of my career right before then. And then this year I went back to that silent meditation retreat for 5 days this time. And again, doubled that amount and signed the biggest deal of my career right before it. So we have this preconceived notion that we don't have time. But when we do create the time, and it could be it's the power of a pause. I call it the 90-second pause. In 90 seconds, we can come to an agreement and an understanding that will, in the long term, shift so much in the relationship that we're establishing and actually make us more efficient and effective.
You said something earlier where it's full circle for me because you said we're a generation that's craving depth, where we are craving deeper relationships because everything's so surface. It's not, there's nothing getting below that surface level screen, right? This simple scroll of from text to stories to tags, whatever it is. Even Slack and communication with mid-level management is so short-sighted these days, but your 90-second approach makes it, from a leadership standpoint, how you can create depth in 90 seconds is very true. By following through with the right questions, the right intent to make sure that they feel heard, they feel comfortable, can be that difference to make them feel connected and in a deeper relationship, right? So I think that's a really great thought. I like that idea of like 90 seconds could change your business if used the right way.
And it could also be as simple, this is one of my other favorite tools, How often are we walking into a meeting or our office or even at home and we ask the question, how are you? All the time, right?
Yes, very common.
And what does it do? What's the inevitable answer to how are you?
Great.
One word answer. It's either good or fine, always. It's the worst question to be asking, but it's just us being on autopilot. We think, for example, when we go back to that piece we spoke about earlier about how are we so disconnected in a world where there's never been more connectivity, it's this exact reason. Because we say, how are you? In an effort to establish a connection, but it's really not a connection. It's just a filler question. And instead, if we even made this simple shift, instead of asking, how are you? And we retire that question, what if we asked, what's top of mind for you today? And that gives us so much information.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really great trigger, right? It emotionally triggers a thought. You can't just be so surface level. You got to engage.
And it makes it less transactional because even with the rise of all of the technologies and social media, the reason why we are craving that sense of depth is because what we're seeing online often is not the full story. And when we're interacting with the world in a 2D way behind a screen, we have a very limited view of what the world is and can be. But when we interact in a 3D way, whether that's walking outside and not being face down in your phone or not walking with headphones, you start to just see so much more of what is available to you. And that creates possibilities. So it's also maintaining the mindset of curiosity as a really valuable tool to not only humanize workplaces, but also recognize that curiosity turns problems into possibilities.
You know, what's interesting is you've probably heard this phrase a lot, but behavior is one of the most important languages. I mean, behavior is a language, and it's not so much the words that are being said, but it's how you say it, the tone, the emotion. And what sort of behaviors should mid-level managers start deploying to enhance better communication within their teams?
I'll talk about my connection formula. And this formula is what helps to establish a meaningful relationship, conversation, engagement with yourself and with others. 3 components to this formula that have to be there in order for us to establish what we want, which is connection. Now, the first is presence. Often we're not present. And that also comes with listening. Because many times we're listening to respond. If we're listening to respond, we're not actually actively listening. We're in our mind about what we want to say and do next. Presence is a huge element to this because we know and we feel when someone is present with us or when they're distracted. And the simple idea of giving someone your undivided attention makes them feel like they matter.
Absolutely.
Because really the greatest fear in corporate America actually isn't job loss. It's becoming irrelevant. It's feeling unseen and unrecognized. And often that fear wears 1,000 faces in the workplace, right? It's, the subtle anxiety after every new tech rollout. It's the quiet voice that says, don't speak up, you might be wrong. It's the knot in your stomach after a reorg is announced. And it's also the ache of wondering if your work even matters. And presence in its simplest form can really help to mitigate those sensations or feelings that employees might be experiencing. So that's the first. The second piece of this is curiosity, as I mentioned before. Curiosity is a secret weapon. It becomes so powerful in not only challenging our own narratives and stories, but engaging others in a more meaningful way. Like the simple question shift. Instead of how are you, asking what's top of mind for you. Starting a meeting off with a question. So I have a card game a physical human-to-human card game, which is 100 different conversation starters and question prompts. And my manager actually used to do this when I worked at Meta, and she was wonderful with it, where every meeting we would start with a simple question that everyone would go around the room and share their answer and their response. And not only did that create commonality, oh, I didn't know you were into this. I am too. You like this artist? I'm going to the concert next week. Should we go together? That sort of hallway chat, especially in digital environments, is completely missed.
There's the
And
depth.
we have to create, right? We have to create the space for that in meetings or in gatherings. So curiosity is a big component of it. And then it also goes to help us through barriers from a business strategy standpoint, from a culture standpoint. Even another tool that I have is this idea of what ifing, right? We're always what ifing,
Yeah.
but we're typically what ifing in the direction of negativity, worst case scenario. There's a time and place for that. But can we also what if in the other direction? Meaning, what if this person who was short with me today is just dealing with a sick child at home and provoking good intent so that we feel as though it's not a personal attack or a personal agenda, but rather it has nothing to do with us. And it also breeds innovation, and it breeds creation, and it breeds a sense of camaraderie. And then the third element of this is trust, which is, of course, the hardest to instill. But if you have the presence and you have the curiosity, that helps you to build trust. Because when we're not trusting, we're living in what I call the connection gap, which is how we want employees to feel and how they actually feel. The space between where we want to be as an organization, as a company, and where we actually are. And it creates a lot of tension when we're living in that space between. And now when we're not trusting, we're creating a lot of control, a lot of friction. But what if we could trust in a way that helps us to leverage presence and curiosity and make our way out of the gap into connection?
I like that a lot. I love those three ideas. I think they're very well thought of, and there's so much truth to that. Thinking about trust, I mean, that's the ultimate outcome. When there's bidirectional trust in a workplace, you can move mountains. I mean, that's when sustained goal achieving results are being accomplished, right? And, I believe trust is earned, it's never given. And unfortunately, I do see a lot of employers who assume just because I'm giving you a paycheck every 2 weeks that you should trust me. And they believe that's their side of trust. And they forget the importance of the connectivity to earn trust. What are some ways you would think of small business specifically that can continue to earn trust? I mean, getting deeper, getting curious. I love all of these aspects. Are there some tactical strategies that might help your small business America create a culture of trust inside their workplace?
Let's use Microsoft for an example. It's one of the case studies that I refer back to often. Microsoft was doing really well, and then they were not doing really well. And then Nadella, the new CEO, took over. And when he took over, he recognized that he was taking over a know-it-all culture. And that's how a lot of our leadership teams and organizations function. For example, when you're a leader, we have this concept that we have to have all the answers. We most likely don't have all the answers. And that brings in vulnerability, the willingness to say, I don't know, but let me look into it and get back to you. That breeds trust. And what Microsoft did was recognizing this internally competitive, losing relevance in a fast-changing market culture. He shifted it with one word, which was curiosity. And he reframed all of it into a learn-it-all culture. So that means encouraging questions, encouraging exploration, encouraging empathy. And through that, he actually grew the market value over 800%. So trust stems from recognizing that we're more similar than we are different. And if we can be less hierarchical in our approach and more flat in the organization, we create less intimidation. And when people aren't intimidated, going back to the greatest fear of employees, they then feel comfortable speaking up, even if the idea feels silly. And when we think about trust and we think about what are the things that are getting in the way of trust, I'd love to ask you, what would you say is the biggest blocker of trust that you've seen, or even in your organization or in other organizations? And then maybe I can tailor a tool or a resource for that.
The biggest blocker of trust, in my opinion, is depth of communication. I believe that failure to promptly communicate and articulate the why behind the ask quickly discredits people's justification for accomplishing said task or responsibilities, or whatever it is. I think this is a cultural phenomenon that's happening out there, is everyone, because of this instant access of information at our fingertips, it's become apparent that everyone wants to know why. Why does that matter? Why do I need to do it? How is this going to impact me? Like, everyone feels like this, they need to know. And when a manager, a supervisor, any hierarchical change says, hey, I need you to do this, and they're not expanding into why, the subordinate is like, I don't trust it. They feel like they need to know the why, which blows my mind, right? Like, if you go back to the factory day workers and Ford's factory and, early 1900s, I can't imagine the guys like asking all the, like, so why do we need this in a line? Not everyone needs to know everything, but I think one of the biggest blockers of trust is being able to explain the why in a way that allows them to feel value to the task that they're accomplishing. If we can get to that level, I believe, in our communication paradigm in our workplace, is to just explain the why, to allow them to anchor value, that I'm important. To your point, you said the biggest fear of every employee is irrelevance. If we can substantiate their relevancy with an answer of why, your roles, your tasks, your goals, your performance, I believe that's going to create trust. I could be going sideways down a railroad track with this answer, but that to me is one of the biggest factors of trust that's missing, is communicating and articulating the why.
Love that you brought that up. And what has been true in my coaching and team building work has been the idea that we are so focused on ROI, which is return on investment. But I want to make a case for ROC, which is return on community. Because what we need, to your point, is more acknowledgement. Often when things are going well, things are going well. When things are not going well, everyone's in fight or flight, stress mode, rapid deadlines. And when we're thinking about speed all the time, we miss the moments to recognize, to celebrate, to say thank you, to honor. And when we think about feedback, we mostly think about delivering constructive feedback. Or we have to wait for our performance review in order to see how we're doing. And if we could establish more regular routine check-ins, and again, this doesn't have to be long. It could be 5 minutes for, this was one thing I saw that you did this week that was really good. Even in the beginning of a meeting, calling out a colleague for something they did well. Who has a win of the day? And if we zoom out of even workplace, it's almost ingrained in us in our life, because when you think about something good happening, like a promotion, what happens? We celebrate for maybe an evening. We go out for dinner or something exciting. And it's maybe one evening. But then we're on to the next goal and the next metric. But when we think about loss, we allow ourselves to grieve for far longer, and that affects us for far longer than it does a celebration moment.
It's making me think of this shift that I've noticed in the 20 years of workplace that I've been able to see is, being a millennial, there was a big thing about all you care about is how you feel. And that's true to a big extent, right? How many millennials don't feel safe? They don't feel wanted. They don't feel this, and they're making actions based on this emotion of how they feel. The shift that I have witnessed is now the social construct. It's not as much about how I feel, it's how I'm perceived socially by others. The judgment of I should do this task because if I don't do it, they're going to think less of me or they're going to see me in a different frame of light. That can become the fear motivator, but then the driving positive motor could also be my family, friends, and peers will perceive me as a certain level if I accomplish this. That almost becomes the motivator more so today than I would feel really great about myself if I accomplish this goal. It's the motivation of social grading. I just think that that's really fascinating. Are you seeing that shift yourself? Are you observing this shift in motivational triggers?
Absolutely. And what I see all the time with my coaching clients, an exercise we go through is defining success, because all of us are operating there are three definitions of success. The first is society's. So in your viewpoint, what are your beliefs around what it means to be successful? Then the second definition is what were our parents' definition of success?
Yeah.
And now the third definition, okay, well, what is my own actual definition of success? And how do those three line up? And what has been the driver in my actions, behaviors, motivators? And even doing that simple exercise builds trust, because we're all also motivated by different things. And so to have that understanding of one another, especially at work, creates so much more collaboration.
I think one of my biggest takeaways from this conversation today is just the power of connectivity through it, which creates community, right? I think you're absolutely spot on that when people feel they're part of a tribe because of the depth, the communication, the trust, all of those become emotional anchors. I don't want to use the word handcuffs. Let's call them emotional anchors to be more loyal to an organization. And we're seeing it left and right. People are jumping ship. And it's not just for the 10-cent raise that you want to believe. And that's the story a lot of people tell in their head. It's because there's no emotional connectivity. It's the yearning for those social cues, the social attaboys out there, right? The growth, the movement. I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed, so many people are failing to achieve their own personal goals. They're trying to achieve the goals that people think they should be achieving.
I was one of
And
those
so
people.
yeah, it's common. I think I fall in that to a big extent as well. I feel like I'm
Yeah.
certainly motivated based on the perception of how others should see me and so being able to open up and have those honest conversations within a team could create a lot of internal connectivity is like what really is your motivator and just having that place where you can talk about what what helped you grow. Um, Anything else? Any other big takeaways, Chloe, if you're a small business leader out there and looking to build
Yeah.
community and trust within your company? Any other last party nuggets?
I really like the perspective that you just reflected, in the sense that for whatever reason, we've been conditioned to treat work as a separate entity, when meanwhile, work is such a big component of our life. And there has to be this integration. And to your point of community, work is a community, but it's not necessarily nurtured as such. I think back to my research around community building and what makes one community thrive versus another. What's fascinating is the biggest factor in what makes a community thrive, and this is more, I would say, personal communities or hobby-based communities, however, it still definitely applies, is actually not the leader, but it's the relationships formed amongst the members that makes people come back, that encourages them to participate, that creates a sense of, I want to show up for this because I know that I might meet a friend here or I will enjoy myself. And I'm thinking how those principles can absolutely be applied at work, because from my own experience, from the thousands of people that I've served, we really don't usually quit a job. We actually quit a manager,
Yeah,
or we quit
very
the
much.
people. We quit the culture. And that tells us everything. And I know, earlier I didn't share the exact statistics that I wanted to share with you, but it's quite alarming what the statistics are. And I'll share just two quickly with you. But, the first of which is that 62.4 million per year is lost with companies that have 100,000 employees or more because of poor communication and because of a lack of trust and because of things like missed deadlines, duplicated efforts, burnout, and internal politics. And even more staggering than that, 8.8 trillion, not a typo, is lost in productivity globally because of disengaged employees. So connection is not just a feel-good concept, it's actually lucrative.
Chloe, are you making a case for go back to the workplace and maybe virtual, work environments aren't as wonderful as every virtual employee says they are?
There isn't maybe a yes or no answer to that. There are always digital habits that we can install that help to create the connectivity we lose virtually. However, what I've seen in startups that have become very successful as they scale, there has to be some sort of program that brings people together multiple times a year or at least once a year. And if you have those protocols and policies in place, it can work. Hybrid models are seeming to do really well right now while giving employees flexibility, but also having a home for people to come to. So I really think it depends on, the policies that HR and leadership is bringing into the culture and the company with a lot of intention, not just doing it to check a box. And I don't think there's ever one way to do something. I think it just has to come down to, how do we get to know our people? How do we actually know what they want? And how do we meet those needs?
Well, Chloe, you've been phenomenal. I love your experience on human connectivity, and your company name is Human to Human, which is so fitting for these topics. How can people learn more about you or follow your journey?
Thank you for having me. First of all, it was such a privilege and a pleasure to be here. And I hope your listeners feel really inspired by our conversation today. So my website is humantohumanlife.com. That's where all of my resources, services, offerings, and my card game is that you can purchase.
Oh,
So you can find me
fantastic.
there. And then on social media, it's Human to Human. Same on TikTok, I'm there as well. And on LinkedIn, it's just Chloe Street.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really, really, really appreciate your energy, your expertise, and sharing some of those nuggets.
Thank you.